Enzo asked one terrifying question. Do you want your sister dead? Valentina had married into a world where betrayal was paid for in blood. After Chiara threatened her, Enzo didn't yell. He didn't panic. He simply sat across from his pregnant wife and asked whether she wanted Chiara to live or die. In that moment, Valentina understood the full truth of the man she married. He had broken her heart, but he would still kill anyone who came near her child. Let us stop and look closely at this moment together. It is 2 a.m, and this stone ape breathes with that heavy, suffocating quiet that always settles before a life is permanently fractured. Valentina is a restless, newly pregnant wife, wandering down a freezing marble hallway for water. A breathless laugh spilling from her husband's study stops her cold. She peers through the narrow gap in the oak door. There is Enzo, the untouchable boss of this criminal empire, gently running his hands through her own sister's hair. Chiara traces his ink, like he belongs to her. Tragic reality of our human people standing close to us are often the ones holding the sharpest blades. Watch how her trembling hand instinctively drops to shield her stomach. 8 weeks pregnant. The 2 people she loves most on this earth are casually dismantling her sanity just inches away behind a heavy wooden door. The hallway stretches into a dark, suffocating tunnel of isolation. Her mind begs her to kick the door open, to scream until her lungs give out, to tear them apart with her bare hands. But she does nothing. She is entirely paralyzed by the sickening scale of the betrayal. She stands frozen against the cold plaster, forcing her eyes to witness the destruction of her own family. It teaches us a brutal truth about survival. Even when your soul shatters into 1,000,000 pieces, the body somehow forces you to remain standing on your own 2 feet. Consider the apex predator in his natural habitat. Enzo swore a sacred oath to Valentina exactly 3 years ago, yet here he is, brushing his knuckles against her sister's cheek with a tenderness he has starved his own wife of. Chiara leans into his hand with a familiar grace that proves this is a well-rehearsed dance. You can practically see the memories violently flashing behind Valentina's wide eyes. Every Sunday dinner, Chiara smiling over the table while Enzo rested his hand on Valentina's thigh. She was never his partner. She was merely the audience for their toxic romance. Life has a cruel way of exposing the reality we choose to ignore. We often only see what we desperately want to see, until the truth burns our eyes and leaves us with nowhere to hide. Think about the vicious timing of fate in this room. The doctors confirmed her pregnancy just 1 week ago, a tiny spark of hope after 2 years of crying in the dark, while Enzo grew colder. Now the silence makes terrifying sense. Ciara's voice slips through the crack in the door, empty of any guilt. "You have to tell her," she whispers softly. Enzo mutters something too low to hear, but his broad shoulders say enough. He slowly shakes his head, pulling her own sister tight against his chest. In that exact fraction of a second, something deep inside Valentina quietly dies. That desperate, lingering love just evaporates into the cold air. Love does not always end in a fiery explosion. Sometimes, it simply freezes to death in the pitch black of night. Valentina slowly backs away into the shadows, pressing her shaking spine against the wall, just to keep her legs from giving out entirely. Her eyes are swimming in heavy tears, but she bites the inside of her cheek until she tastes warm copper. She absolutely refuses to give them the satisfaction of hearing her break. Drifting down that dark hallway like a ghost, she floats past the stern portraits of Enzo's ancestors and the door to the freshly painted nursery. Back in their cold bed, she just sits there, staring at the far wall as the clock slowly ticks away. The sky outside bleeds from black to pale morning blue, and she does not move an inch. The hardest lesson of grief is realizing that silence is often the loudest scream a truly broken heart can ever make. Let us think back together for a moment at the glaring warning signs she chose to ignore. The late nights Enzo casually blamed on syndicate business. The hushed phone calls in the kitchen. How Chiara suddenly started visiting every single day, playing the perfectly devoted sister. Valentina wrapped herself in a cozy blanket of denial, but now the cold reality hits her skin. When the heavy bedroom door finally clicks open at 6 in the morning, she stays perfectly rigid. She feels the heavy dip of the mattress. Enzo reaches out, casually brushing his fingers against her shoulder, and her entire body violently flinches. "You are awake early," he murmurs into the room. Smooth and guiltless. Denial is just a comforting lie that eventually suffocates the truth right out of us. Notice the terrifying calm rolling off him. That is the chilling control of a man who orchestrates violence and eats his dinner without his pulse rising a single beat. "I just could not sleep," she whispers to the wall. He asks if the baby is keeping her awake, sounding exactly like a caring husband. She nods her head, playing the role, because deception is the only shield she has left. When his large hand slides over to rest on her stomach, her skin literally crawls. These are the exact same hands that were tangled in her sister's hair hours ago. "You need to get some rest," he tells her smoothly. It is a terrifying realization. True monsters do not hide in dark alleys. They sleep right beside us, wearing the faces of those we trust with our lives. She can feel his dark eyes burning into the side of her head, studying the stiff lines of her posture. A man does not rule a criminal empire by ignoring the subtle shifts in a room. But Enzo possesses a fatal, blinding flaw, his own massive ego. He firmly believes his sweet, quiet wife is entirely too weak to see through his brilliant lies. "Is something wrong?" he asks, his voice dropping into the cold tone he uses for syndicate business. She slowly rolls over. In the gray morning light, she truly looks at him. The sharp jawline, the empty eyes, the dark ink covering his skin. He built his life around family loyalty, only to completely destroy it by sleeping with her blood. It shows us all that arrogance is a heavy blindfold, preventing powerful men from seeing their own doom. Valentina takes her shattered heart, locks it in a steel box, and throws away the key. "Nothing is wrong at all," she lies thusly. Enzo buys it instantly, fueled by his own arrogance, and climbs out of the bed. "I am going to be home late tonight. Do not wait up for me," he says, adjusting his expensive watch. She stares at those tattooed hands reaching for the brass door handle, and then drops the bait. "Enzo," she calls out. He stops. "Is Chiara coming over for family dinner this week? Did you catch it?" That microscopic twitch in his jaw. A woman running on pure adrenaline misses nothing. "I do not know," he replies. "Why?" She offers a dead smile. The most dangerous weapon anyone can possess is a sweet smile that perfectly hides a completely broken spirit. His jaw tightens up just a fraction of an inch. "That sounds fine. Let me know what you decide." He walks out, leaving her sitting alone in a bedroom that suddenly feels like a cold crime scene. "Stick with me here, because we are about to watch a soft girl transform into a lethal weapon." The next few days are nothing but pure, agonizing survival. Valentina drifts through the massive estate like a shadow, playing the loving wife, while her soul hardens into solid rock. She smiles at the staff. She lets Enzo kiss her cheek without flinching once. But behind those dead eyes, she is quietly gathering ammunition. She tracks his phone. She notes the heavy locks on his study. Because deep grief does one of two things. It either destroys you completely, or it forges you into solid steel. 2 endless days later, Chiara struts into the house, looking like absolute perfection, her voice pitched high with fake sweetness. "You look so incredibly tired," Chiara purrs, tilting her head like a curious bird. Valentina gives her a weak, hollow nod. Then the predator steps closer and squeezes Valentina's cold hand. "I worry about you being all alone in this massive house." Valentina quietly points out that the house is full of staff. "Maids are not blood," Chiara counters smoothly. If you look closely, you can clearly see the sadistic thrill dancing in Chiara's dark eyes. "Call me anytime," she insists. Valentina slowly pulls her hand free. A harsh truth of life is that betrayal often wears the most beautiful masks, painting sheer poison with the brush of sisterly love. "I mean it." Chiara pushes, leaning in closely like they are sharing a deep, sacred secret. Marriage can be so lonely when a man carries that much power. You need someone who actually understands what you are going through. that sick, twisted taunt, just hangs in the heavy air between them, like a drawn blade. Valentina searches her sister's pretty face, desperately looking for a single drop of genuine guilt. But there is absolutely nothing. Just that same smug, arrogant smirk Kiara has worn since they were children stealing toys. She has always taken exactly what she wanted, and right now, she wants the king of the syndicate. I really need to lie down, Valentina says flatly. You can never expect a real apology from someone who completely enjoys the exact pain they have caused you. Let's freeze the frame right here. You and I are watching the exact moment a human soul breaks apart and builds itself back together. Send him my regards, Valentina says, her voice as sharp as a razor. The other woman tries to mumble an excuse, but for a split second, her fake smile falls apart completely. Valentina turns and walks away, her chest heaving. She slips into the dark bathroom, grabbing the edges of the cold sink, so hard her fingers lose their color. Staring back in the glass is a ghost exhausted, hollow, the leftover pieces of someone who trusted too much. But look closely at her expression. The quiet, loyal partner is gone, and a new hardened survivor is taking her place. It is a hard truth of life. Sometimes the worst pain you can experience is the exact push you need to finally see the world as it really is. Let's break this situation down. Just try to picture the worst betrayal anyone could face. Enzo, the man who promised to keep her safe, has been sleeping with her own sister. Valentina slowly rests a shaking hand on her pregnant belly, treating her body like a shield. This baby doesn't need a victim. It needs a protector. I won't let them ruin us, she whispers to the empty room. She has no idea yet whether we'll pack a bag and disappear, or strike a match and watch his whole operation burn. But the heavy weight of her shock has lifted. She is entirely done watching her own life fall apart from the sidelines. It reminds us of a bitter reality. Sometimes a completely broken heart is the exact thing we need to wake up from the lies we tell ourselves. Now look at Enzo through the eyes of his right-hand man, Marco. For 15 years, Marco watched his boss make brutal choices over morning coffee, without blinking. He was cold, sharp, and untouchable. But today, that solid foundation is cracking. Marco walks into the office to warn him about a rival crew. Enzo just stares blankly at his phone, lost in his dirty secret. Boss, did you hear me? Marco asks, genuinely worried. Enzo throws the phone down and waves him off, telling him to deal with it alone. When Marco hesitates, Enzo loses his temper, throwing away his authority. This teaches us a simple truth. A man who demands absolute control only gives up the steering wheel when his own terrible decisions have finally dragged him underwater. Danger is at the door, but the boss is asleep at the wheel. Marco pushes a little, asking if things are okay at home. Enzo instantly tightens up, snapping that his personal life is off limits. Marco points out that a distracted mind is dangerous. Enzo drops his voice into a chilling tone, warning his second-in-command to back off. Marco nods, playing the good soldier, but his brain is working fast. From that second, Marco starts paying closer attention. He notes the late-night calls. He watches the sister hanging around like a vulture. This reveals a very hard truth about trust. Even the absolute strongest loyalty has an expiration date. For Marco, that loyalty vanishes the moment he watches the last bit of hope finally fade away from Valentina's exhausted eyes. This is the saddest part of the story. Valentina used to be the only warmth in that cold house, asking the guards about their kids and treating the staff like family. Now, her face looks like carved stone. Marco knows exactly what he is seeing. He is watching a trapped woman secretly build a bomb in the dark. He stays quiet, pretending to be Enzo's loyal shadow, but he hears the clock ticking. He is simply doing the math on who makes it out alive. 3 weeks after finding out her husband is a fraud, Valentina starts moving her pieces on the board. There is a powerful lesson to take from this. Real survival never starts with broke plates and screaming arguments. It always begins in pure silence, through the small, unseen changes in how a broken person decides to move forward. She starts shifting her things to the guest room, building a quiet wall between them. She plays it smart, claiming She must sleep alone for the baby's safety. The sick part is that Enzo doesn't question it. He sees her pulling away as a win, leaving him free to keep sneaking around with her sister. Soon, she stops showing up to his dinners, using nausea as an excuse. When he tries to touch her, her body recoils, hiding her disgust behind fake apologies about feeling ill. Every lie adds another brick to the wall protecting her. This shows us that deep patience is a dangerous tool. She is watching him the way a scientist watches a rat in a maze. Just waiting for the moment he finally realizes the cage door has been locked from the inside all along. Men like Enzo cannot handle losing their grip. They hate when someone stops playing by their rules. He boxes her in by the kitchen counter, using his size to pin her against the cold stone. He grabs her arm, squeezing just tight enough to send a warning. "You've been distant," he says, his voice angry. Valentina keeps her face blank, quietly blaming the baby for her mood. Enzo feels the temperature drop. He gets right in her face, giving off that same dangerous energy she once found so attractive. But look closely at her eyes, she isn't blinking. There is a vital lesson in that empty stare. Once the illusion of true love falls apart, the fear disappears right along with it. The only thing left in her cold expression now is absolute, unforgiving disgust. "Tell me what's wrong," he pushes. Let's step into her head for a second. Every nerve wants to scream the ugly facts into his smug face. She wants to tear his ego apart, to ask how many times he slept with her sister. But she bites her cheek until she tastes blood. She refuses to give him her tears, understanding that real payback needs quiet time to grow. "I'm just tired," she answers, her voice totally flat. Enzo stares hard at her. His gut tells him she's lying, but he has zero proof. He slowly lets go, leaving a silent threat hanging in the air. She walks away, leaving him to sweat in his own paranoia. It teaches us a valuable lesson. True power is learning to hold back your fierce anger until the absolute perfect moment to strike. Stick with me, because the irony of what happens next will make your stomach turn. The idea to throw a family party actually comes from Chiara. The sister calls Valentina in a sugary, fake tone, rambling about getting everyone together. Valentina stands completely frozen. She listens to her own flesh and blood worry about seating charts, fighting down actual nausea. "That sounds great." Valentina chokes out, sounding entirely hollow. Chiara happily mentions that Enzo cleared his weekend to cook, so his pregnant wife can relax. Valentina hangs up and stares at the blank phone screen. The harsh lesson of betrayal is painful but clear. The people holding the knife behind your back will always flash the warmest, sweetest smiles to hide exactly what they are doing in the dark. You and I have seen this arrogant game play out before. The cheating husband and his partner putting on a massive show, completely high on the thrill of their own lies. It is a pathetic display. But as Saturday night gets closer, Valentina isn't crying into her bedsheets. She is sitting in the dark, quietly sharpening her mind. She refuses to give them the messy, hysterical breakdown they expect. Instead, she plans to float through that party like a ghost. She wants to watch every secret look they give each other, mapping out their betrayal so she can tear the whole house down. The takeaway from her cold calmness is powerful. When someone hurts you this deeply, keeping your mouth totally shut, is the most dangerous and effective weapon you could ever possibly build. When the night arrives, Valentina stands like a statue before her mirror, treating her closet like an armory. She puts on a bold red dress that highlights her bump while radiating total power. To anyone else, she is the perfect, loyal wife of a crime boss, but inside her head, it is a war zone. "You look amazing," a deep voice says. Valentina turns to see Enzo leaning in the doorway. He wears a sharp black suit, his collar open to show the tattoos on his neck. He looks her up and down with a greedy stare that makes her want to be sick. She forces a small, polite smile onto her face. It reminds us that keeping your cool when you want to scream is a very rare superpower. "Thanks," she says softly. "You should head downstairs. The guests will be here soon. They can wait," Enzo says smoothly, moving across the room like a shark smelling blood. He grabs her waist, locking her in place before she can pull away. "I've missed you," he whispers, his voice full of fake sympathy. "I know things have been hard, but after tonight, it'll be different. I promise." The irony of his words is suffocating. Does this man honestly think a fancy dinner will fix the rot inside his soul? "I know," Valentina answers quietly, delivering a flawless performance. Enzo kisses her forehead, acting like an owner marking his property. It proves a simple, deadly rule in life. A fool who falls in love with his own lies will never see the blade coming until it is far too late. 10 minutes, he tells her, his voice cold. "Don't keep everyone waiting. Let's look at this opening shot together." The camera pulls us through the suffocating gold of a mafia ballroom, resting on Valentina. She stands before a massive mirror, her reflection drowning in the deceptive glow of flickering candles. "After tonight, everything changes," she whispers. You can almost smell the dying orchids, a fragile attempt to cover the rot of betrayal. Her sister, Chiara, engineered this entire spectacle. Around them, men in tailored suits circle like vultures, their polite handshakes hiding bloody histories. Valentina is a ghost haunting her own dead marriage, forced to play the untouchable queen. It brings us to a harsh truth about survival. We rarely realize how heavy the crown is, until the exact moment we are forced to finally take it off. The director deliberately frames her isolation here. Valentina floats through a sea of meaningless chatter, forcing polite nods while clueless wives offer hollow advice about motherhood. But the lens pushes tight on her eyes. They are cold, calculating, tracking the room. She spots Enzo, his heavy, inked arms aggressively cornering a terrified banker. Then the visual anchor violently shifts to Chiara. Dressed in blinding blood-red fabric, Chiara laughs way too loudly. She desperately clutches a guest, but her hungry eyes keep snapping back to Enzo. She is starved for his toxic validation. Honestly, it is a pathetic and tragic dance to witness. The most heartbreaking part of watching a betrayal is seeing the traitor destroy their own soul just to earn a villain's passing glance. Stick with me for this frame, because this is where the tragedy turns irreversible. Enzo and Chiara believe their sins are hidden in the shadows, but their arrogance always demands a blood price. A smooth, quiet voice suddenly shatters the background noise. Mrs. Carbone. Valentina turns to find a stranger bathed in cool, silvery light. He wears a suit that screams quiet power, though his polite smile never reaches his cold, analytical eyes. Dante Moretti, he introduces himself, extending a steady hand. That name echoes like a death knell in her mind. Moretti means an ocean of spilled blood. A pleasure. She lies without missing a beat. You and I know how the real world operates. The devil does not kick your door down in the dark. He simply knocks, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. The camera lets us sit with her stiff posture. Valentina has been suffocating under Enzo's control. For so long she has forgotten the natural rhythm of breathing. But Dante does not look at her like a piece of property. Under the harsh chandelier light, his gaze offers a terrifyingly genuine recognition. It hits her chest like a physical blow, sending a sudden warmth into her pale cheeks. She fights to keep the rigid armor of a loyal mob wife intact. Yet Dante gracefully slips a plain card into her trembling palm before melting back into the crowd. It is a microscopic exchange, but it shifts the earth beneath her feet. The bitter truth of living in a cage is that one unexpected drop of kindness is often all it takes to shatter the iron bars holding you back. She is staring down at the card when the room feels like it drops 10 degrees. Enzo materializes from the dark spaces behind her, moving like a predator smelling blood. The lighting catches the violent ticking of his jaw. He grabs her elbow with brutal precision. His fingers dig deep into her skin, a physical reminder of who owns her. He interrogates her with a venomous whisper. But this time, instead of shrinking into the quiet victim role, Valentina holds her ground. The camera tightens on her face. For the first time in her life, she stares directly back into his dead eyes and defies him. He squeezes harder, his forehead shining with a sick, paranoid sweat. True liberation begins the exact second you finally realize your supposed safe haven is actually a slaughterhouse. Here is where the tension hits a beautiful breaking point. A bitter, hollow laugh spills from her lips, cutting straight through his Mafia Kingpin illusion. Enzo instantly panics. He weaponizes her pregnancy, calling her hysterical, to mask his own crumbling dominance. The camera zeroes in on the exact second she stops buying his garbage. With a sharp, sudden motion, she rips her bruised arm out of his heavy grip. The chaotic buzzing of the party drops to absolute zero in her mind. Enzo is left standing under the chandelier, his terrifying mask slipping away to reveal a small, intensely frightened boy. That invisible, toxic chain between them is finally severed. The true face of a monster is always exposed the moment they realize they no longer hold a single drop of power over your soul. Look at the brilliant framing here as Valentina rushes the glass balcony doors. Her chest heaves with jagged breaths. The cold moonlight washes over Valentina, and you can see an immediate physical shift in her shoulders. She is no longer weeping for a broken romance. She is waking up to the heavy, suffocating chains of a trauma bond. Marco, the massive enforcer for the crime family, steps out from the deep shadows. He plays the dutiful guard, his voice a low, gravelly warning for her to hide her tears, but watch his face closely when she drops the name Dante Moretti. A tiny, uncontrollable twitch hits his jaw. We see genuine dread in the eyes of a hardened killer. It leaves us with a simple truth about human nature. Those who build their entire existence on fear can sleep peacefully with their own demons. They share the dode, yet shatter the second chaos enters their carefully ordered lives. Let us look closely at the spacing in this scene. As Valentina repeats Dante and his mocking insults, Marco refuses to step across the doorway. For a giant of a man built entirely for violence, maintaining that physical distance is a rare act of mercy. He talks about generations of spilled blood, understanding this breach was a test of their defenses. Then she confesses she kept the number. Marco loses the deep rumble in his voice instantly. He barks at her to throw it away, but you can hear the raw panic leaking through. Valentina stands tall, her chin raised high, and the focus shifts to Marco. He realizes he is looking at a fighter now. It proves a quiet, haunting lesson. Sometimes the only real conscience in a house of monsters belongs to the man paid to do their dirty work. Marco defaults to the tired lines of the crime family, trying to frame her silent misery as honorable loyalty. In response, Valentina lets out a hollow, bitter laugh that freezes the air in the room. She verbally shreds her husband, calling out a man who loves to light fires and then play the victim when he smells smoke. Pay attention to Marco right here. He offers absolutely zero defense. His quietness hangs in the air like a guilty plea, marking a man who sees the daily rot but swallows his words. She stares this giant killer dead in the eye and tells him to get out. His broad shoulders slump as he backs away, taking a post in the hall. It is a difficult truth to learn. The people who are too scared to pull you from the fire might just stand guard while you save yourself. Stick with me here, because the irony in this moment is heavy. The hired muscle shows far more mercy than the man she married. Valentina is barely catching her breath when Chiara glides into the room. Listen closely to the sugary sweetness in her tone, which is the exact pitch of a traitor concealing a knife. Chiara repeats the same lies Enzo uses, stepping far too close. Then, the realization hits. Valentina's eyes widen the second the scent registers. It is the exact heavy, floral perfume that always haunted his private study. Her worst fears instantly harden into cold, undeniable fact. Chiara even uses the baby to twist the blade further. It reminds us of an ancient tragedy. The deadliest wounds rarely come from our sworn enemies. They are delivered by those who share our blood. Valentina throws up a shield of sarcasm, desperately checking for any trace of a soul left in her sister. Chiara simply tilts her head, putting on the condescending voice of a disappointed parent. She completely rewrites their shared past, reducing Valentina to a mere shadow. Watch the terrifying disconnect in her body language. Chiara gently strokes her sister's arm in a soothing way, while her mouth spits absolute poison. She projects her own ugly guilt, blaming Valentina for stealing the life she feels she deserved. The traitor admits her crimes, by projecting them onto the victim. The lens rests on Valentina as the last pieces of her heart shatter. It teaches a painful lesson. Realizing your closest ally is actually driven by bitter envy will permanently change how you see the world. Look closely at the harsh light, catching a cruel twitch at the corner of Kiara's mouth. You and I are going to unpack what this moment really means. This is not just sibling rivalry. It is the quiet thrill of a predator watching someone break apart. The camera slowly cuts to Valentina, who is completely frozen. You can practically feel the panic rising in her throat. Her hands tremble as she tries to blame the spinning room on the wine, clinging to any excuse to keep her world intact. It brings us to a simple, heavy life lesson. You can never hide from reality forever. The truth just waits patiently in the shadows, letting you exhaust yourself running, right until the moment you are entirely too weak to fight back. Watch how the camera lingers on Kiara here, giving us a masterclass in emotional destruction. She takes Valentina's most beautiful traits, her sweet innocence and total trust, and coldly turns them into fatal flaws. She is whispering that a man like Enzo belongs only to the stronger predator. Then comes the devastating kill shot. She drops the reality that this sickening affair began the exact day they buried their father. It shatters the screen. We must recognize this timing is no coincidence. It brings us to a harsh but meaningful lesson about human nature. Real predators do not attack when you are standing tall. They wait patiently until your soul is entirely hollowed out by grief, because a broken spirit is the easiest place for a monster to hide. Let the frame freeze and look at the twisted logic across Kyra's face. She stands in the dim light, framing this vile betrayal as if she were simply comforting a mourning husband. Desperate, Valentina plays her last card, bringing up her unborn child, praying for a single spark of decency. Instead, Kiara's hand slithers out to touch the baby bump. It is a sickening display of dominance, silently claiming ownership over her sister's future. When Valentina slaps that cold hand away, Kiara's eyes light up with pure joy. It leaves us with a chilling life lesson about the darkness some people carry. To a deeply broken mind, completely destroying. Your own family is never a tragedy. It is simply an exhilarating game, and you can never win by playing by their twisted rules. Marco stepping into the frame is the only thing keeping this ballless ballroom from becoming a brutal crime scene. Valentina completely shuts down, her face turning to stone as she builds an emotional fortress, just to survive the long walk across the floor. Through the hazy lights, she spots Enzo soaking up the absolute devotion of his followers. But watch his face the second he sees her wandering alone. The fake warmth vanishes, replaced by raw panic. He grabs her waist, his fingers digging in just hard enough to remind her exactly who holds the leash. It brings us to a terrible lesson we all must learn eventually. Realizing that the person you love sees you as nothing more than property is a bitter poison to swallow. But it is often the very first drop of the true antidote. You and I are going to strip down the layers of this scene together. Valentina attempts to stand her ground, looking this crime boss dead in the eyes, telling him not to play her for a fool. But her voice is hollow. Enzo instantly flips the script, his eyes turning to ice as he demands she repeat herself. It breaks her resolve entirely, and she retreats to the guest room like a wounded bird. Now, focus on the sound design. The party fades away. The massive house goes completely silent. Then, the heavy footsteps echoing down the dark hall. The metal handle rattles violently. It leaves us with a haunting life lesson. The heaviest silence is never just the absence of sound. It is the terrifying anticipation of the monster, about to break your door down. Notice how instantly the fragile illusion of safety evaporates in this shot. Enzo is not gently asking for permission to enter. He promises to kick the heavy wooden door off its hinges. Men like him do not understand boundaries. They only see obstacles they are entitled to smash. She turns the lock. He steps into the dim room, his tailored jacket gone, revealing the dark ink that tells the true story of his violent nature. He traps her in the corner, his shadow entirely swallowing her, and accuses her of keeping secrets. The irony of his demanding honesty while covered in her sister's scent is suffocating. It proves a timeless life lesson. A person obsessed with total control will always project their own darkest sins onto the one they are terrified of losing. He paces the room, rattling off her changing habits like a weary detective, reading a rap sheet. She will not touch him, and she refuses to meet his gaze. Valentina tries to hide behind the safety of her unborn child, but he brutally strips that defense away. He raises his voice, boasting about his own brilliance, demanding she spit out the truth. The psychological projection is blinding, but look closely at the shift in Valentina's posture. She lets out a bitter, exhausted laugh. This is the exact frame where the bleeding prey decides she is entirely done running. She takes his demand and turns it into a loaded weapon, asking about his late-night secrets. It gives us a beautiful life lesson. There is nothing more dangerous to a tyrant than a human heart that has finally run out of fear. With cold precision, she begins tearing down his carefully constructed alibis. The phantom phone calls, the endless late nights, and then she drops the devastating truth right onto the floor between them, her sister. For the first time, we see genuine terror wash over the face of an untouchable mob boss. The blood completely drains from his cheeks. He tries to play the fool, but she paints the vivid picture for him, his hands tangled in Kiara's hair, right there in his own study, just 3 weeks ago. The silence that follows practically suffocates the room. As she demands to know exactly how long this has been going on, his jaw locks tight. It is a stark life lesson for all of us. A lie can build a towering fortress, but it only takes one agonizing truth to bring it all crashing down. 6 months. 180 days of smiling warmly across the dinner table, while tearing her universe apart in the shadows. The camera stays fixed on Valentina as the timeline clicks into place. This nightmare began the exact afternoon they lowered her beloved father into the dirt. When Enzo quietly confirms it, the physical impact is visceral. Her legs simply give out. She collapses onto the mattress, her hands instantly flying to protect the innocent life growing inside her, weeping that he violated her world with her own blood. His response? He tries to minimize the damage, claiming it meant nothing. It teaches us a brutal but vital life lesson. The deepest, most fatal wounds are never dealt by our enemies, but by the hands we trusted to hold us when we were falling apart. She throws her trembling hand out, drawing an invisible line on the hardwood floor, forbidding him from taking one step closer. Sensing the total loss of control, Enzo wildly pivots. He abandons the hardened mobster persona and begins to plead, attempting to paint himself as a misunderstood victim. But the fog has fully lifted from her eyes. She cuts through his performance, asking if he truly expects her to fold back into the shape of a blind, obedient wife. He frantically swears the affair ended tonight, a desperate spin for redemption. You and I know exactly what this really is. It gives us a very clear life lesson. Apologies born strictly from the panic of getting caught are never about true regret. They are just cold manipulation, trying to salvage a broken toy. When pushed into a corner, the narcissist always falls back on the exact same script. Watch how rapidly his frantic panic melts away, instantly replaced by a dead, calculating stare. He realizes that every tool in his arsenal, the endless money, the intimidation, the promises, is completely useless against a woman whose heart has already been burned to the ground. It is tragic, yet fascinating, to watch a man who dictates life and death in the underworld realize he has zero power inside his own bedroom. He puffs his chest, projecting authority, but the illusion is dead. It serves as a profound life lesson for us to remember. True power is never found in the chains you place on others, because the moment they stop fearing the pain, your entire empire is already finished. Let us sit with this emotional turning point. Valentina looks at this monster through her tears and states clearly that she and her baby are not just assets on his ledger. That single sentence completely shatters his twisted fantasy of ownership. She reclaims her dignity and orders him out. Stripped of his perfect doll, Enzo slips his cold mask back into place, whispering a promise to make her pay. The instant the door clicks shut, her adrenaline crashes. She sinks to the floor sobbing, the toxic grief bleeding out of her soul. She is still a prisoner in this mansion, but she has won the night. It teaches us a beautiful life lesson. Sometimes, the most magnificent display of human courage is simply remembering to keep breathing in the dark until you can finally find your way to the light. Take a slow look at the lonely layout of this beautiful cage. The father who once protected her is dead and buried. Her own flesh and blood is now the architect of her suffering. Every single guard walking these expensive halls answers only to the devil she married. But watch what happens to the warden when his captive stops caring. Enzo starts spiraling into a total mental collapse. He skips his usual crime meetings, pacing the cold marble floors like a paranoid, rabid dog. The tension is incredibly thick as he sits across the long breakfast table. His eyes look hollow and dead as he quietly mentions she has not eaten a single bite. It proves a harsh reality. A cage made of solid gold is still just a prison, and the most dangerous moment is when the monster realizes he is losing control. Pause right here and look at the dark tattoos creeping up his neck. They are a permanent receipt for the sheer violence he tries to hide under his expensive tailored suits. We are watching a silent, brutal tug of war. By refusing to touch her food, she starves him of the one thing he desperately craves, which is her absolute submission. In a flash of pure desperation, he tries to use their unborn child as leverage. When he violently slams the fragile cup onto the table, it is just raw, ugly panic spilling out. He actually begs her to talk about the weather, to pretend their marriage is not entirely rotting away. His voice cracks in half. It reveals a simple truth about life. A man can force 1,000 enemies to their knees, but no amount of power can ever force a heart to love him. Look closely at the total stillness in her face. You and I are going to unpack this together. The man keeping her hostage, the architect of all her misery, is rapidly losing his mind. His hands, the same hands that have destroyed countless lives, are reaching out across the table. He is practically begging for a magical clean slate. Yet she just sits there, looking like a flawless statue of ice. She refuses to even glance at her wedding ring. Instead, she casually mentions a lunch invitation from Chiara. In a fraction of a second, all of his desperate pleading vanishes. The cold, terrifying monster snaps right back to the surface. It serves as a chilling reminder. In many cases, the quietest reaction you can possibly give is the most devastating weapon against those who try to break you. You hold your breath here, because she is dancing right on the edge of a cliff. She challenges him directly to his face. It is essentially a death wish with a man known for such sudden violence. He instantly twists the narrative, painting Chiara as the grand villain, while completely erasing his own long months of betrayal. The mental gymnastics on display are staggering. Valentina just stares right through him, leaving her meal entirely untouched. She knows their marriage is nothing but dust and ashes. Then she delivers a heavy blow. She threatens to walk out and take his unborn heir away if he tightens his grip. She is gambling with her actual survival now. But life teaches us that sometimes you have to risk losing absolutely everything just to find out how strong you really are. He throws a heavy threat across the morning table, but he does not follow her out the door. That small detail marks a massive shift in their power dynamic. Valentina heads straight to the meeting. Chiara, always paranoid and calculating, picked a bright crowded plaza, so his men cannot simply drag them into an alley. But the second Valentina sits down, the attack begins. Chiara cruelly mocks her tired appearance, casually ordering a drink just to show off her own freedom. She sits there, radiating arrogance, waiting for the waiter to leave so she can start digging into fresh wounds. It is a truly heartbreaking reality to watch unfold. We often learn the hard way that the people who share our blood are sometimes the first ones waiting to strike when we are already bleeding. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Chiara leans across the table, completely starving for every tragic detail. She expects Valentina to be a crying, shattered mess, and she clearly has no idea how to handle this dead, emotionless stare. Kiara tries incredibly hard to dress up her toxic betrayal as genuine sisterly concern, and it is entirely sickening to witness. She knows exactly how this violent criminal world operates, yet her only advice is to roll over and take it. She wants her sister to play the perfect hostage and just enjoy the expensive prison. But she misses a crucial human truth. Selling your soul for the promise of a comfortable cage never actually brings safety. It merely guarantees that you will stay locked up in the dark for the rest of your natural life. Watch how Kiara delivers her warning, speaking as casually as if discussing the weather. She knows these waters are thick with blood. Yet when pressed, she practically smiles, calling it a search for a cheap thrill. This is when Valentina plays her devastating final card. With chilling calm, she announces the affair is already dead. The camera lingers, capturing Kiara's ego, shattering into jagged pieces. Valentina surgically dismantles her, exposing the reality that Kiara was merely a distraction for a bored sociopath. When the walls closed in, the monster protected his actual prize, his wife. It is a harsh, unyielding truth we all must face. If you try to build your happiness on the destruction of someone else, that rotten foundation will always collapse right on top of you. You can pinpoint the precise second the panic takes root. Kiara flushes red before the blood drains from her face. Her grand delusion is completely dead. Valentina forces her to stare at the facts, the deafening silence on his end, and the way he vanished without a trace. That silence proves she was played. Valentina slowly stands up, casting a long shadow over the table. She leans in, delivering a promise of ruin, so cold it freezes the air. She is wielding the exact same ruthless tactics she learned from her husband. But the moment she steps out into the street, her entire body begins to shake uncontrollably. The lesson here is simple. You can wear the toughest armor imaginable, but underneath the steel, we all still bleed. We have to stop and ask ourselves, why is she shaking so violently? Is she terrified of the ruthless monster she is becoming, or secretly addicted to the sudden rush of power? The scene cuts to the stark white lights of the clinic. Dr. Ferretti is no ordinary physician. She stitches up cartel hitmen in the dead of night. But, looking at Valentina's charts, even her hardened professional mask slips. The physical toll of this waking nightmare is flashing across the monitor. Her heart rate is spiking out of control. The doctor knows this suffocating stress is a ticking time bomb for the unborn child. It is a devastating truth we often ignore. You cannot outrun your environment. The heavy toxic stress we carry hidden in our minds will always find a way to break our bodies down. Stick with me, because this conversation is crucial. Valentina instantly throws up her walls, lying through her teeth that everything is perfectly fine. Dr. Ferretti confirms the baby is safe, but her eyes stay locked onto Valentina's crumbling mental state. The doctor tries to break through that heavy armor, offering a fragile sliver of hope. But then, she makes a catastrophic mistake. She tries to justify the mob boss' violent behavior. She admits he is a monster, but dares to call his twisted obsession love. That is the most dangerous trap in the world. Mistaking absolute control and toxic possession for genuine affection is exactly how people end up trapped in the dark. True love is supposed to heal your deepest wounds, never hold you hostage. Look at the way her eyes are glued to that glowing ultrasound monitor. That tiny heartbeat is the only pure thing left in her universe. It is a blank slate, untouched by the vicious venom of its parents. But Valentina knows the bitter reality. No amount of desperate affection can erase the fact that he burned her trust to the ground. She walks out of that clinic, holding the only proof of life that matters, and immediately collides with the architect of her nightmare in the hallway. He actually freezes. His hands twitch, desperate to hold her. But he forces himself to stop. She just stares straight through him and repeats the hollow lie that she is fine. Sometimes, the biggest lies we tell are simply to survive the next 5 minutes with the exact people who broke us. Fast forward to that silent night in the dimly lit nursery. The room is half finished, Much like the ruins of their shared life, he stands by the window, staring out into the pitch-black darkness. His paranoia runs so deep that he hears her footsteps before she even speaks. Out of nowhere, he starts rambling about his violent legacy and his terrifying fear of fading away. Valentina stays firmly by the door, keeping a clear path to run if the air turns violent. She asks him the ultimate question: was she ever anything more than a fancy incubator? He finally turns around, the cold mafia mask completely gone. He admits she was the only soul who ever saw him as human. It is wildly tragic. The people who demand the absolute most loyalty from you are often the first ones to tear it to pieces. The psychology unfolding in this scene is absolutely staggering. She stands in the wreckage, demanding to know why he destroyed their entire existence. His answer reveals a raw, unfiltered terror of genuine human connection. For a kingpin who thrives on absolute control stuff, her slipping past it, his emotional armor felt like a weakness he simply could not endure. To regain his footing, he dragged her own sister into the shadows, foolishly believing he could compartmentalize his sins. Now we watch him drown in regret, finally realizing his massive ego extinguished his only light. It leaves us with a profound realization. When you spend your entire life constructing heavy iron walls to keep out the pain, you eventually lock yourself inside with the darkness. I want you and I to step into this final frame together. We are witnessing a brutal masterclass in toxic loyalty. Valentina stares directly into the eyes of the man who reduced her world to ash. The jagged ink on his neck mirrors the permanent scars he carved into her spirit. He gazes back with a manufactured, desperate agony, acting the part of the wounded lover as she declares their trust is dead. Yet, the moment his fingers brush her cheek, the pain in her chest flares up like a wildfire. He leans in, whispering he cannot survive without her, and we see the snare tighten. It is a haunting reflection on human nature. Trauma is a vicious cycle that completely rewires our instincts, making us crave warmth and comfort from the exact same fire that is burning us alive. The camera lingers beautifully on her frozen figure. Instead of running, Valentina turns to stone under the cold light of the nursery. Enzo gently touches her cheek, a calculated stroke designed to pin her exactly where she stands. Predators of his nature do not ask for forgiveness. Instead, he offers a grand illusion, whispering he will abandon his entire crime syndicate and vast wealth if she just stays. It is the frantic, desperate dance of a wolf trapped in a snare. The silence stretches until she finally asks why he needs more time, effectively handing the executioner his axe. It leaves us with a deeply unsettling lesson. Sometimes, simply choosing to listen to the monster is exactly the mistake that locks you inside the cage. Pause on this exact frame to appreciate the tragic holding in the shadows. Valentina raises her trembling hands to establish a boundary, acting as if willpower could hold back a hurricane. Enzo masterfully plays the devoted servant, retreating into the dim lighting. He knows a king must occasionally kneel to win the larger war. When she threatens to ruin him if he harms her sister, he dismisses it with a chilling wave. She leaves him alone among the unpainted cribs, haunted by the family they will never become. For weeks, he quietly obeys her rules, playing the gentle victim, Al Street, but it forces us to confront a bitter reality of the boundaries we set. You can never build a wall high enough to protect yourself when you have already let the devil sleep inside your house. Enzo demands nothing, surviving entirely on the cold scraps of her shadow across the hallway. Yet the cinematography reveals this isolation as a calculated lie. He is a ghost, haunting her every breath. When the midnight sickness hits, his hands are right there, in the moonlight, gently holding her hair back. He weeps when their unborn child kicks against his palm. As rival crime families circle the estate, he sits outside her door in the pitch black like a loyal hound guarding his prize. Marco watches this suffocating warmth melt her defenses, finally pulling her into the dying autumn garden to break the spell. It holds a terrifying mirror to our own lives. The saddest truth of human nature is that the deadliest poison often tastes exactly like salvation. The camera pans to Marco, his face carved with deep, exhausted lines under the fading sun. He is the only soul in this syndicate entirely immune to Enzo's psychological warfare. He warns Valentina she is growing weak, willingly stepping back into the jaws of a steel trap. When she defensively asks why an enforcer even bothers to care, Marco just collapses onto the stone bench. The heavy toll of 20 years spent cleaning up mafia bloodbaths visibly settles on his shoulders. What truly terrifies him is how this monster loves. It is not true affection, but a bottomless, consuming void. Marco locks eyes with her to deliver a crushing realization we all need to hear. A predator might genuinely weep for the pain he causes you, but he will never actually unlock the heavy iron doors of your cage. Marco delivers the brutal truth with the precision of a surgeon. He asks how she expects to build a safe home on a rotting foundation of obsession. Valentina crumbles, burying her face in her hands as she confesses the lines between love and madness have blurred entirely. Marco rises, blocking the sun, and drops the final hammer. He urges her to strike before her sister finishes the job. The blood instantly drains from Valentina's face. Chiara has transformed into a reckless force, aggressively selling their syndicate secrets to the underworld. Left alone among the dead roses, Valentina clutches her unborn child in pure dread. It brings us to a harsh, unavoidable lesson. Sometimes in life, our hardest choices are never between good and evil, but between two guaranteed disasters. Watch closely with me as the twisted psychology of this trauma bond unfolds. Instead of fearing for herself, Valentina is consumed with terror for the mobster keeping her chained. The midnight quiet shatters when her phone vibrates with a blocked number. Every instinct screams to ignore it, but anxiety forces her to answer. The smooth voice belongs to a rival apex predator, Dante Moretti. Valentina stops breathing, demanding how he bypassed their security. Dante speaks with terrifying elegance, claiming he is simply offering a professional courtesy. Her reckless sister is about to burn their kingdom to the ground. It stands as a stark reminder. No matter how deep you bury your past, your unresolved mistakes will always hunt you down in the dark. Dante lowers his voice to a chilling purr, making sure she feels the invisible strings he pulls from miles away. He paints a vivid picture of Chiara, eagerly trading their lives to the highest bidder. Valentina grips the nightstand, begging for details. Dante casually lists the devastating secrets her sister is selling, enough to hollow out Enzo's empire. Why would a ruthless rival offer this mercy? Dante claims respect for the old rules, but the cinematic truth is darker. He knows her husband is a ticking powder keg. If Chiara gets Valentina hurt, Enzo will drown the city in blood, and Dante refuses to burn with it. The agonizing irony leaves us with a grim realization. Sometimes, the only fragile shield protecting you from the outside wolves is the terrifying devotion of your own worst enemy. Bathed in the suffocating blue tones of the early hours, the scene lingers on Valentina's isolation. Any rational person would expose their sister's treason, but Valentina is so fractured by betrayal that she shoulders this crushing weight in pure silence. This is the true masterpiece of abuse. It isolates you until you believe you are entirely alone. The next afternoon, she steps into the smoke-filled air of a private club. Dante sits in the corner, a chilling portrait of dominance. He rises slowly, tracking her movements like a scientist, examining a doomed specimen. He openly mocks her arrival, bringing us to a profound, heartbreaking realization. When the world repeatedly shatters your spirit, quiet surrender simply becomes your tragic, automatic response to the pain. Valentina locks onto his hollow gaze, ignoring the porcelain cup slid across the table to demand the unvarnished truth. Dante leans forward, painting a dark masterpiece of familial treason. For 3 weeks, her own flesh and blood has been mapping the coordinates of Enzo's downfall. Chiara's prize is to raid the vaults the second the king loses his crown. Dante outlines the chilling psychology. The moment Valentina and the child vanish, Enzo will shatter into jagged pieces. Dante tilts his head, shadows catching his face, and asks what her next move will be. She crumbles into the leather seat, confessing she is too broken to act. He offers zero comfort, leaving us with a harsh truth. The world will never pause its brutal turning just because your legs are too weak to keep walking. You and I must take a moment to study the terrifying intellect of this man. Dante is clinically dissecting the anatomy of a monster. He reveals that Chiara did not merely sell mafia shipping routes, she sold the rotting core of their marriage. She weaponized the child, turning a husband's manic obsession into a ticking time bomb. Blood drains from Valentina's face as she asks why a broken heart matters to the criminal underworld. Dante's reply is razor sharp. A chaotic boss is dangerous, but a king consumed by a single queen is completely predictable. She is his fatal flaw. When she argues she is just a woman, not a weapon, he coldly corrects her. It leaves us with a profound truth to carry forward. The deepest love you hold can quickly become your absolute, most lethal vulnerability. Dante signals the waiter with a slight gesture, closing the meeting as if they had merely discussed the rain. He confesses he will not strike. The ensuing bloodbath would simply cost too much. So why drag her here? He wears the mask of a businessman, but the camera catches a fleeting shadow of genuine mourning in his eyes. He knows the freezing agony of a knife twisted by your own family. It is a poison that permanently rewires the human soul. Valentina rises, her chair scraping violently, declaring she owes him nothing. Dante stands with terrifying grace, offering an exit her husband would never permit. She walks out into the blinding daylight, but the poison is already in her ear. Sometimes, the devil, sitting across the table, understands your sorrow better than the angels at home. The second she steps across the threshold, Enzo's patient facade snaps. He stands silhouetted against the grand window, his face twisted into paranoid rage. The puppeteer has lost his favorite strings. He stalks forward, demanding her exact coordinates. When she offers a trembling half-truth, he closes the distance in a blur, stopping a hair's breadth from her face. The ink on his throat pulses with a frantic heartbeat. He snarls at her to stop lying, admitting Marco tracked her every move. His tone drops into a fragile whisper, begging her to say she did not betray him. But Valentina anchors her feet. With ice crystallizing in her veins, she looks directly into his hollow eyes and speaks Dante's name. No matter how deep you bury it, the brutal truth always kicks down the door. Let us frame this shot together. The room goes absolutely dead, the silence pulling the air out of your lungs. We hold the camera on Enzo. You can watch the circuits in his mind snap, first terror, then blinding rage, before freezing into a hollow grief. Valentina stands her ground under the harsh lighting. She confesses she met the enemy just to measure the depths of her sister's malice. Repeating every toxic word Dante fed her, Enzo sheds no tears. He simply empties out, shifting as the violent monster inside him reclaims control. He stares at the floorboards, whispering he should have buried Chiara on day one. Here is the brutal truth of the scene. A predator's nature will always suffocate his promises. You cannot save someone from the poison they refuse to stop drinking. Pause the film right here and study the composition. Valentina just told Enzo she is not his sister anymore, her words laced with quiet venom. How does he react? He opens the classic narcissist playbook. The camera pushes in as he forces tears, swearing he confessed to protect their child from Chiara's jealousy. It is amazing how flawlessly he plays the victim. Valentina stares right through his act, stating she does not trust a single breath he takes. But look at her feet. They remain planted. She does not walk out that door. The tragic irony is suffocating. The very person who shatters your world suddenly becomes the only shelter you want to hide inside. Life teaches us this painful paradox. Unhealed trauma will always convince you to embrace the blade that just cut you. Watch his hands carefully in this sequence. Enzo reaches out to touch her, then lets his fingers hover before pulling back. It is a brilliant calculated move, forcing her to cross that boundary herself. He softly praises her, crowning her the patron saint of forgiveness. But then the sharp buzz of a phone shatters the score. A text from Chiara lights up the screen, showing a stalker photo of Valentina at the club, threatening to burn their lives down. Enzo reads it right over her trembling shoulder. Instantly, the grieving husband routine dies. The warm lighting seems to turn cold on his face. You can see the mafia boss resurrecting in his dark eyes. It teaches a chilling truth about human nature. A predator only plays tame until he realizes another wolf is circling his cage. Valentina whispers into the shadows, "Let her come." It sounds like a cinematic line of defiance, but if you look at the tremble in her jaw, the truth is clear. She is drowning, desperately grabbing the wheel of a sinking ship just to feel some illusion of control. Enzo does not even blink. He sheds the weeping husband's skin and steps into the role of a warlord. The director cuts forward a few hours. The lavish mansion is now a suffocating bunker. The civilian staff is gone, replaced by armed men pacing the perimeter. Where do we find our tragic heroine? Isolated in the dim library, her hands gripping her swollen stomach like a lifeline. When your entire universe is turning to ash, the human mind instinctively clings to the one pure thing left, just to keep the darkness from swallowing you whole. Let us look closely at the costume design in this frame. Together, you and I. Every single thread tells a violent story. Enzo leans against the heavy oak doorframe, sleeves rolled up to expose the dark ink mapping his forearms. The soft sweaters from earlier acts are gone. He is advertising exactly what he is, an apex predator. He quietly orders her to eat, a subtle psychological tactic to reestablish dominance, but she refuses to bend. Notice the deliberate blocking here. He stays across the room, maintaining a cold physical distance, waving off her threats as desperate noise. He is absolutely certain the rival bloodline will not intervene. Enzo understands the mechanics of panic. He knows that if you refuse to give fear any oxygen, the fire has no choice but to starve. It is a hard life lesson we all eventually face. Sometimes, the only way to defeat the chaos in your world is to firmly deny it, your reaction. Why is Enzo so certain the rival faction will hold their fire? The script quietly reveals he already cut a cold, bloodless deal with Dante entirely off camera. In this syndicate, a street war simply ruins the bottom line. But watch the tension spike as Enzo slowly crosses the room, shrinking the physical space between them to drop the heaviest line of the act. He asks if she actually wants her sister dead. The ambient sound drops to absolute zero. Right here, Valentina is forced to stare the devil directly in the face. She tied her life to a man who treats human breathing like a math equation he can erase at will. By refusing to sanction her sister's execution, she is fighting a desperate war for her own morality. In the end, preserving your soul often means refusing to play the game by the monster's rules, even when it costs you everything. It is genuinely agonizing to watch this sequence unfold. Valentina begins to ramble, her voice cracking as she talks about braiding hair and weeping at their mother's grave. She is mentally retreating into the warm, sepia tones of the past because her present reality is far too grotesque to witness. Enzo absorbs this with eyes like flat, dead stones. He finally delivers the ruling. Chiara will survive this night, but she is exiled forever. Then, lingering by the heavy door, his impenetrable armor fractures. He tells her he is genuinely trying to be a better man, for her and for their child. The absolute deepest tragedy here is that he actually believes his own lie. But true evolution does not happen just because you suddenly locate a moral compass. We only change when we are absolutely terrified of losing the one fragile thing we finally managed to hold on to. Watch her face closely in this lingering close-up shot. Just like that, the hard lines of Valentina's rage dissolve into a sick, twisted hope. This is the dark magic of the trauma bond in full effect, painting a masterpiece of ultimate deception. The director cuts to dawn, the lighting a bruised, slate gray that perfectly matches her internal world. The sprawling estate is now a fortified tomb. Armed sentries block every exit, deadbolts locked tight. But Enzo is a ghost. Valentina storms into the glowing monitors of the security room, demanding answers. Marco refuses to break eye contact, playing the dutiful soldier. He sells her the comfortable lie that this cage is built purely out of love. It is a cautionary tale we see in real life too often. Control is always wrapped in the velvet language of protection, and isolation is always sold to you as a dedicated bodyguard. The dynamic shifts dramatically right here. Valentina is completely finished playing the fragile, kept woman. The camera angles low, empowering her as she raises her voice, demanding agency over her own existence. Marco starts sweating under the harsh fluorescent lights, trapped up between a lethal boss and the boss's wife. His resolve finally shatters. He confesses that Enzo took a heavily armed strike team straight to Chiara's door, hastily throwing in the word non-lethal as a pathetic bandage over a gaping wound. Then, Marco delivers the fatal emotional blow, whispering that everything Enzo does today is for her. Stick with me here. Do you see the psychological trap? He is forcing her to wear the heavy, bloody coat of Enzo's violence. It teaches us a brutal truth. Toxic people will always try to make you the excuse for their own darkest sins. Marco explains the Mafia's version of mercy. They offer Chiara a bag of money and a one-way ticket out of town, but the unspoken threat hangs heavy in the room. If she refuses, she dies. Stick with me through this visual pivot, because this is where Valentina's denial completely shatters. She can no longer pretend she did not willingly marry a ruthless killer. Against all logic, she demands to see her sister one last time, rushing right past Marco and his desperate warnings. It totally defies reason. But human nature is a stubbornly complex thing. Sometimes, we force ourselves to walk straight back into the burning wreckage of our most toxic relationships, simply because our hearts need to see the cold ashes to finally accept that the love is gone. The camera work here is brilliant. We see a freezing concrete warehouse, serving as a physical mirror for the dead space existing between these two women. Valentina steps out from the shadows, surrounded by guards. Notice the blocking. She pulls her thick coat tightly across her stomach, turning it into a human shield. In the center of the room sits Chiara, trapped under a single, harsh spotlight. Her dress is ruined, and dark makeup stains her pale cheeks, yet her arrogance remains entirely intact. She goes right on the attack, mocking Valentina for finally growing a spine. It reveals a deeply tragic reality about human ego. Even when their entire world is collapsing, a true narcissist you stop everything to admire the shiny blade they used to cut you down. Valentina stands there, her voice cracking as she asks the heaviest question possible. She simply asks why. She is desperately digging for logic in a graveyard, trying to grasp how her own sister could orchestrate her ruin. Chiara leans into the harsh light and unloads a lifetime of bitter poison. She crafts a fantasy of being the invisible second child, forced to watch Valentina effortlessly gather the perfect husband and the wealth. To Chiara, these were not blessings. They were stolen trophies. Valentina cries out that she never even wanted this dark life. But the camera lingers on Chiara, and her cold smirk, proving the utter futility of the argument. Here is the harsh truth. You can never negotiate with madness, and you cannot reason with someone who treats their own victimhood like a sacred religion. The scene descends further into darkness. Chiara spits out decades of festering jealousy, admitting it killed her that their mother loved Valentina more. When Enzo chose the older sister, it pushed Chiara into a bottomless pit of insecurity. Watch Valentina in this exact shot. She completely stops searching for an apology. You can pinpoint the frame where her soul turns to ice, finally realizing how deeply broken her sister actually is. She asks if that was the only reason she slept with Enzo. Chiara does not even blink. She just smiles. She did it simply to prove she could shatter her sister. It was never about forbidden romance. It is a grim reminder that some people will destroy your entire life just to win a sick competition that you never even knew you were playing. Chiara leans forward, shamelessly confessing that pulling a lethal predator into her bed gave her a rush of pure adrenaline. Destroying her sister's sanctuary was the only thing that made her feel powerful. The ambient audio drops out completely, leaving a physically heavy silence. Pay close attention to the blocking. Valentina does not scream. She simply walks closer, staring down at the stranger wearing her sister's face. She whispers that Kiara used to be her only safe harbor in her dark world. Kiara struck the match because she could not tolerate the sight of another person being happy. It leaves us with a devastating psychological truth. Some people will gladly burn down your entire house, just so they can stand by the ashes and finally feel a little bit of warmth. Let us pause the film right here and look at this masterful shift in power. Valentina's voice drops to absolute zero. She now holds the power of life and death, and as she looms over the chair, pure terror finally shatters Kiara's arrogant mask. But Valentina does not give the execution order. She spares her, not out of weakness, but to honor the ghost of the little girl who once chased away her nightmares. She tosses the stack of cash onto Kiara's lap and issues a final decree to vanish forever. If she returns, Valentina will unleash her ruthless husband without remorse. Here is the ultimate lessons we take from this heavy moment. Sometimes, protecting your own peace requires you to completely mourn and bury a person while they are still standing right in front of you. Let us unpack this scene together and examine the wreckage. The camera lingers on Valentina as she realizes that exile is a much colder punishment than a bullet. Outside, in the bleak lighting, Enzo waits. Watch his expression closely. To the criminal underworld, he is a god of absolute terror. But the second his eyes meet his wife, the harsh shadows on his face soften. His armor falls away. Right there, we see the most terrifying weapon a manipulator possesses. They use selective vulnerability. He asks if she is okay, wrapping her in a fake blanket of empathy, just to test how much of her shattered mind he still controls. The lesson here is incredibly brutal. The sharpest traps in life never actually look like iron cages. They look exactly like open arms, waiting to catch you when you fall. Was she actually okay? The lighting shifts, casting heavy shadows over her face as her reality turns to ash. Her sister is gone, her marriage rests on lies, and her concept of love is built on deep trauma. She whispers a quiet no, but promises to fall right back in line. The camera pushes in as Enzo opens the car door, his fingers lightly brushing her back. It is a calculated movement, reminding her that she needs him to survive. She does not even flinch. The drive back to their estate is suffocatingly silent. It is the tragic stillness of two broken people, realizing they are permanently chained together. It teaches us a grim psychological truth. Sometimes we cling desperately to the exact person who just hush, simply because the pain they cause is the only familiar thing we have left. Follow the camera into the freezing foyer of their mansion. Enzo plays the dutiful husband, softly mentioning he must go clean up the bloody aftermath of their violence. Just watch the tragedy in Valentina's eyes. He spared her sister only to ensure Valentina owes him her life. Then, out of nowhere, she mentions finishing the baby's nursery. The tonal pivot gives you absolute whiplash. Enzo freezes. His hardened face is suddenly illuminated by a fragile, desperate joy. It is a masterclass in manipulation, using the image of a happy family to drag his victim right back into the honeymoon phase. If this scene leaves you with one lesson, let it be this. Hope can become the most lethal drug in the world when it is gently handed to you by the exact person who poisoned your soul. Enzo accepts this delicate truce with quiet intensity. The lighting catches the sheer exhaustion on Valentina's face. She lays it out plainly. This does not mean she trusts him. She is simply too tired of always bracing for his next betrayal. When she admits she wants to try again, it shatters the heart. Stepping back into his golden cage feels infinitely safer than facing the unknown. Notice Enzo's body language here. His hand literally trembles in the air, waiting for permission to touch her. When she leans into his palm, a shockwave rolls through her body. This frame reminds us of a very hard truth. When you are deeply starving for safety, even the smallest crumb of affection can make you completely blind to the monster standing right in front of you. The second his skin meets hers, months of crushing grief melt away. Her body craves comfort so desperately that it silences every alarm bell ringing in her head. Enzo softly swears he will spend his life earning her surrender. She closes the bedroom door before her resolve completely crumbles. That night, her mind finally allows a dreamless sleep. The camera then gives us a beautiful montage, showing seasons bleeding from spring into summer as they play house. They paint the nursery together, wrapping themselves in a shared delusion. The bitter lesson of this beautiful lie remains perfectly clear. You can paint over a rotting wall with all the bright colors you desire, but the deep decay is still going to bring the entire house crashing down on you eventually. You and I must pause the film here and look at how perfectly they decorate this gorgeous trap. They bring in an antique crib, hanging a delicate mobile that chimes a haunting lullaby. These are just pretty props, placed to make a twisted reality look normal. The wall between the monster and his hostage begins to crack. She has not forgiven him. Yet, she slips into that dangerous survival mode, known as cautious hope. We watch them spend quiet mornings trading childhood trauma over black coffee. He uses his abusive father to justify his sins, while she whispers about being the forgotten daughter. It paints a devastated psychological picture. Shared trauma might feel like a profound romantic connection, but building your emotional foundation on broken glass will always leave you bleeding in the end. Let us unpack this together. You and I are watching exactly how a trauma bond sets like concrete. The cinematography captures Valentina desperately trying to turn this nightmare into a home. Notice the deliberate touches her hand on his lower back, fingers straightening his collar. To anyone else, they are healing. In truth, it is pure survival. Inside his dimly lit study, she whispers that the baby is kicking. Enzo freezes, completely unmoored, asking if she is sure. She is poking the monster in the dark, begging to find 1 ounce of humanity, to prove she is not losing her mind. The brutal lesson here is written in blood. Never test a poisonous snake, just to see if it has a heart. A snake only knows how to strike when cornered. Watch the brilliant execution of this scene. Enzo approaches her, like a wounded animal terrified of spooking its prey, dropping straight to his knees. A ruthless king who commands a criminal empire is bowing before his pregnant wife. The second his hands feel that tiny kick, the icy mask shatters. He weeps that he deserves neither of them. It is the ultimate manipulation, weaponizing his own self-hatred to reel in her endless empathy. Valentina, fully submerged in her delusion, strokes his hair and promises they will try for all 3 of them. He presses his face to her stomach and sobs uncontrollably. This leaves us with a haunting truth about human nature. The most dangerous tears you will ever wipe away are the ones cried by the exact person who ruined you. Let us zoom in and deeply analyze her reaction. She never pushes him away. Instead, she absorbs his tears, praying this shattered shell of man can somehow become a real father. But then, the script violently flips. At 28 weeks pregnant, the shrill ring of his private phone cuts through the heavy silence. The physical shift in Enzo is terrifying to witness. His face drains of color, and his body floods with violent adrenaline. He hangs up, and she demands the truth. His jaw locks like a steel trap as he drops her sister's name. It hits Valentina like a sudden blow. Chiara is alive, and she is selling them out to the rival family. The tragic irony of this moment proves the hardest lesson of all. The past never stays quietly buried if it knows exactly where you live. In one brutal frame, the illusion of their safety shatters into dust. Enzo's voice is dead as he reveals Chiara leaked the biggest secret of all. The camera catches the panic rising in Valentina's chest as he realizes they know about the hospital and the unborn baby. The floor falls out from under her. She begs to know why her own blood would betray her like this. Enzo's eyes go pitch black, explaining the rival cartel wants leverage, and a crime boss heir is valuable. His hands tremble with homicidal rage. He screams he should have shot Chiara when he had the chance, smashing his fists against the desk. It is a terrifying display that echoes a brutal reality. When you show mercy to a scorpion, you can never be surprised when it comes back to sting your child. You and I are going to watch this scene unfold and witness the ultimate narcissistic spin. Enzo completely spirals, making this crisis entirely about his own bruised ego. He screams that his past betrayal made her sister hate them enough to sell out their unborn child. Now watch Valentina's blocking. Her twisted survival instincts take over, and she steps directly toward the ticking bomb. She gently rewrites the narrative to stroke his pride, whispering that the poison belonged to Chiara, not him. She locks her desperate eyes with his, anchoring him. Slowly, his manic screaming fades into the dead, hollow stare of a predator plotting a bloody war. It is a sobering lesson. When you spend all your time managing a monster's emotions, you forget how to protect your own weary soul. His grand solution to this tragedy is to lock her away completely. The script leans into the classic abuser playbook here: absolute isolation. He declares they are going off the grid until the baby arrives. When she asks about his criminal empire, he knows exactly which emotional strings to pull. He grabs her face, pressing his thumbs into her cheeks, and swears the money and the power no longer matter. He whispers that only she and the baby exist to him now. To her battered mind, this dark isolation feels exactly like true romance. They pack under the cover of darkness and flee to a heavily guarded mountain fortress. Life teaches us this painful truth early on. When someone builds a giant wall to protect you, they are usually just building a prison they can quietly control. Look closely at this frame with me, because it establishes the entire tragedy. The camera follows them up a series of winding mountain roads, headlights slicing through the pitch-black woods. In the back seat, Enzo grips Valentina's hand with a white-knuckled intensity, his eyes scanning every passing shadow for a potential sniper. When the tires finally crunch over the gravel, Valentina inhales the sharp scent of pine, desperate for any sense of peace. Enzo stares up at the massive stone fortress, and his thick armor suddenly cracks. He whispers that his grandmother brought him here, the only soul who saw an innocent boy instead of a weapon. The grabbing truth of life is that even the most ruthless monsters are merely chasing the fading ghosts of those who once loved them. Let the camera linger in the pale, ghostly moonlight pouring through the glass. The sheer isolation of this empty is a psychological pressure cooker. The cool light highlights the brutal geography of his scarred skin as she quietly demands the truth. He turns slowly, the heavy silence stretching on, and confesses he is entirely exhausted from the hiding. And then, the devastating blow lands. His rough voice cracks as he tells Valentina he loves her, that he has loved her since the very beginning. For a battered spirit, those words trigger a chemical rush, violently rewriting her shattered reality. It is a deeply brutal lesson of human nature. If you starve someone of basic kindness for long enough, they will eventually mistake a single crumb of affection for a lavish feast. Watch the slight tremble of his fingers. As he reaches into the frame, she challenges his sudden confession, reminding him of his past silence. His defense is the suffocating shadow of death, whispering that he was a coward, terrified they would not survive the night. He gently brushes his thumb across her cheek, wiping away silver tears. She did not realize were falling. The horrific tragedy is that Valentina is staring into the eyes of her destroyer, watching him carefully rebuild the very soul he tore apart. She drops her gaze, admitting she cannot say the words in return. He accepts this softly, murmuring he only needs her to feel it. The quiet truth of life is that while pure love never demands a reward, the most masterful manipulators know how to patiently play the long game. The tension in the room is suffocating, broken only by her ragged breathing. She whispers into the dark that she believed her love was a corpse, buried by his own violent hands. He closes the distance, pressing his forehead firmly against hers. A cinematic portrait of overwhelming dominance. A healthy person would flee the frame, but Valentina, reshaped by captivity, tilts her chin upward and meets his lips. It begins as a hesitant exploration between two ruined souls, before erupting into pure combustion. Months of suppressed rage and terror ignite into a feral hunger. They cling to each other, like sailors drowning in a pitch-black ocean. The harsh reality of life is that when basic survival becomes braided with dark passion, the resulting inferno burns away your entire identity. They break apart, the camera capturing the frantic rising of their shoulders. She commands him to take her to bed, her voice shaking. In a quiet display of manipulation, he pauses, questioning her certainty, dropping the emotional weight back onto his victim. She replies by pressing his palm against her pregnant stomach, surrendering to the tragic illusion. He leads her to the bedroom, kneeling down to light a roaring fire. Warm shadows dance across his back, illuminating the brutal tattoos she once feared. When he turns around, his expression is entirely stripped of its cruel armor. The deep lesson here is that a monster's genuine vulnerability is far more terrifying than their rage, because it forces you to confront the painfully broken human hiding beneath the violence. The cruel facade shatters, revealing a desperately fractured man. He offers a hollow illusion of choice, whispering that he only wants to hold her. She tears that boundary down, her trembling fingers undoing his shirt. She confesses she is drowning in suffocating hostility and needs to feel something real. As the fabric falls, the camera pans across a gruesome canvas of his violent history. Faded ink and jagged scar tissue map out a lifetime of trauma. She gently traces a raised white line, and this king of violence shudders beneath her soft touch. She whispers, asking if the old wounds still ache. The tragic truth of life is that love cannot magically heal someone simply by tracing the very scars that they use to terrorize the outside world. You and I must recognize the fatal psychological trap closing right in front of us. We often mistake a broken person's severe damage for genuine emotional depth. He murmurs that his old scars no longer ache, framing them as monuments to the monster he had to become. Pressing her hand against his chest, he makes her feel his racing pulse, selling the illusion of the man he wants to be. They shed every defense, collapsing into a desperate intimacy. Later, cloaked in deep shadows, he traces her skin with religious reverence, whispering how much he missed her. Her quiet reply is that she never actually left the room. It leaves us with a profound life lesson. Physical closeness means absolutely nothing when the emotional bridge between two souls has been meticulously burned to ash. The camera tightens its focus, capturing the exact moment the psychological prison locks shut. He buries his face in her collarbone, quietly confessing the pure agony of her emotional distance. In a truly devastating move, she pulls the architect of her misery closer, whispering that she felt their tether even through her hatred. The cinematography shifts to match their descent. Their union is slow and deliberate, a dark bond built over a massive graveyard of mutual wreckage. Afterward, they lie tangled in the bruised darkness. His scarred hand moves in endless circles across her stomach as he dreams aloud about their unborn daughter. The simple truth is that our most dangerous emotional homes are built upon our own trauma, just because the ashes feel so familiar. We watch these flawed characters project an impossible salvation onto their unborn child. Valentina smiles into the heavy dark, joking that their daughter will carry her fierce defiance. A rare, genuine laugh escapes her lips, and you can actually see the crushing weight of captivity lift for just a second. Then, the tragic peak of her psychological conditioning surfaces. She looks deep into his eyes and whispers that she loves him, a tragic reflex of a profoundly broken mind. She admits she only loves his potential, clinging to a gentle phantom that exists solely in her own imagination. Enzo goes completely still, struck silent by the sheer magnitude of his victory. The life lesson here is simple. Loving a toxic person's potential will only destroy your heart over a ghost. The scene captures a startling reversal in their power dynamic. Enzo confesses his paralyzing terror of losing her, his voice trembling in the quiet room. Her fingers trace the harsh black ink on his neck, a glaring symbol of his ruthless underworld life. Right before our eyes, she begins to rationalize her own abuse, whispering that they are both greater than their darkest sins. As she absolves him, this undisputed king of violence shatters into quiet tears. Instantly, the ruined victim transforms into a soothing caretaker, She cradles this weeping apex predator against her chest, silently vowing to mend the architect of her pain. It exposes a devastating human flaw. We will often blind ourselves to a history of terror just to bask in a single second of fabricated warmth. For a fleeting window of time, the grand villa becomes a stage where they play a tragic pantomime of a normal life. The director perfectly frames them in a sunlit kitchen, laughing over ruined meals to drown out the deafening reality of their situation. With her pregnancy swelling, they stroll along the stone walls, pretending to be ordinary lovers, looking toward a bright horizon. But tragedy always demands its due. When she finally asks about returning to the city, the illusion shatters. Enzo's jaw tightens, his eyes deadening back into the cold stare of a mafia warlord. He casually reveals a dark pact with a rival crime family to eliminate their enemies. The simple lesson is undeniable. You can never outrun the bloody chessboard of consequences you left behind in the real world. Stick with me, and let us look at this frame together, because it perfectly illustrates how fast a captive relies on their warden. Valentina questions the sanity of this dark alliance. Enzo's face remains made of stone, as he states he trusts nothing but mutual self-interest. Drained by months of intense psychological warfare, Valentina does not even try to fight back. She simply collapses against his chest in defeat. He whispers a calculated apology, but watch her chilling response. She no longer demands his moral redemption. She only begs him to keep them alive through the coming slaughter. She appoints her greatest threat as her ultimate shield. The simple reality of life is that paralyzing fear will always convince you to trade your freedom for a comfortable illusion of safety. Step with me into the cold shadows of the villa. Their grand illusion of control shatters a full 3 weeks early. Valentina wakes up in the pitch black, a massive surge of pain overriding every rational thought. Her body is forcing labor at 36 weeks. Enzo jolts awake beside her, pure adrenaline rushing through his veins. She violently grips his hand, her fingernails digging deep enough to bruise the bone. Subordinates scatter down the halls, screaming for a medical transport chopper. Enzo cradles her pale face in the dim light, speaking low, rhythmic Italian, just to tether her racing heartbeat. Life teaches us a brutal truth in moments like this. In our most agonizing times of survival, we will desperately cling to the most familiar voice, even if it belongs to a monster. You and I can practically feel the suffocating tension trapped inside this bedroom. The rescue helicopter is 20 minutes out, but the nearest hospital is a 2-hour flight away. Biology simply refuses to wait. Dr. Ferretti bursts through the heavy oak doors, his sharp authority cutting through the chaos as he banishes the gunman. What follows is a grueling, 6-hour physical nightmare painted in sweat and pure agony. Through every breathless second, Enzo remains firmly anchored to her side. His steady baritone becomes the only rope, keeping her fragile mind from slipping into the dark. It leaves us with a strange, profound life lesson. Sometimes, the exact person who shattered your reality becomes the only force strong enough to hold you together when the walls finally cave in. The sharp wail of a newborn finally pierces the heavy air, and the cinematic lighting in the room visibly shifts. The doctor lays this fragile miracle against Valentina's trembling chest. In a standard film, the camera would fade to black on a happy ending. But this is a deep tragedy. This tiny girl is the living seal on a massive trauma bond. Look closely at Enzo's expression. The hardened, ruthless mobster is weeping silent tears, his armor melting away as he stares at his own blood. It brings us to a quiet realization about life. Even in the darkest, most shattered places a human heart can reach, new life still finds a way to bloom. Yet the tragic irony remains. That same beautiful life just permanently bolted the heavy doors of their shared psychological nightmare. Valentina names her daughter Sophia, a word meaning wisdom. Her tired voice shakes, betraying how desperately she clings to the fantasy of a quiet life. Enzo offers a slow nod, and for 5 fleeting seconds, we almost believe they can outrun their sins. Then, the harsh vibration of a phone shatters the illusion. It is a message from her sister Kiara, laced with venom, and promising to put the infant in the dirt. The fairy tale instantly bleeds out. Their desperate helicopter flight to the city transforms into pure, suffocating paranoia. Valentina curls over her child like a physical shield. It forces us to swallow a bitter life lesson. No matter how thick you build the walls of your denial, your dark past will always find a crack to crawl through and collect its violent debts. Watch Enzo closely during this turbulent flight. The loving father mask shatters to reveal the cold, calculated predator hiding beneath the surface. He lifts the phone to his ear, his voice dropping into a flat, dead void. He orders his men to drag Kiara in breathing, forbidding a quick death. He needs the twisted satisfaction of breaking her spirit with his own hands. Then, in a single breath, he hangs up and turns back to his trembling wife, gently stroking her cheek like a devoted saint. It makes the viewer's blood run cold. When a man can pivot from orchestrating ruin to whispering tender promises in 3 seconds, it reveals a chilling life lesson. The fiercest protector, standing between you and the monsters, is as often simply the most terrifying monster in the room. You and I need to pause the frame right here. This is the exact cinematic moment Valentina's soul turns to ash. Enzo flatly states he will execute Kiara. A year ago, she would have begged for mercy, but now, with a newborn pressed to her heart, the primal drive to protect her blood burns her former ethics to the ground. She stares into her husband's dark eyes and whispers the words that authorize a murder, crossing a moral line drawn in permanent ink. Enzo stares back, a twisted pride illuminating his features. They lock themselves inside their violent fortress, masquerading as a normal family. It is a harsh life lesson we all eventually have to learn. We all firmly believe we are good people, right up until the exact moment we finally have something precious to lose. The massive stone estate now feels exactly like a quiet tomb. Heavily armed men watch over every single shadow, and glass lenses track every breath. The air inside is thick and suffocating. Little Sophia sleeps peacefully in her soft crib, totally unaware that her nursery is the dead center of a silent war zone. Valentina drifts through the long hallways, looking like a hollow ghost trapped in a deep fog of shock. Meanwhile, Enzo is putting on a terrifying masterclass in human duality. One minute, he is planning a merciless, violent manhunt across the city, and the very next minute, he is warming a milk bottle and humming a sweet lullaby to his baby. It highlights a deeply unsettling truth. A man can act like an absolute nightmare to the world, yet fight to be a hero in his own home. Valentina watches her husband cradle their newborn, the dim nursery light catching a sudden, weary hope in her eyes. She whispers how stunned she is by his transformation, desperately wanting to believe the violent maniac she married has finally vanished. For a single heartbeat, the untouchable crime boss looks genuinely vulnerable. He silently begs her to believe in his redemption, swearing to spend his remaining days. Proving her forgiveness was not a mistake. They share a delicate, careful smile, pretending the wolves are not already circling their home. Yet, life offers a heavy lesson about trust. You can apply all the fresh paint you want to a rusted machine, but eventually, the toxic corrosion is going to bleed right through the surface. The quiet illusion bursts the second a guard steps into the frame. They finally caught Kiara. She's dragged down into a freezing concrete basement, heavy metal cuffs binding her like a trapped animal. The woman is hollowed out, her hair matted with grime, and eyes sunken from weeks of terror. Yet, even looking like a bruised ghost, Kiara spits venom, hurling vile insults at her sister. The visual contrast here is staggering. Valentina stands in the grim interrogation room, shielding a sleeping newborn against her chest, while watching her own flesh and blood hit rock bottom. It forces us to swallow a bitter reality. When you attempt to fight blinding darkness with even more darkness, nobody walks away clean. Genuine closure is just a comforting lie we tell ourselves. You and I must unpack the deep rot growing inside this family tree. Kiara screams against her chains, putting on a tragic performance. She genuinely believes she is the innocent victim. She viciously accuses Valentina of stealing their parents, the golden life, and worst of all, Enzo. She glares at the boss, who watches her with absolute ice in his veins. Chiara cries out that their father promised her the criminal empire, screaming she was destined to be queen. Valentina does not flinch. She simply goes numb to the madness, turning her gaze to her husband for the final truth. It offers a heavy lesson about human frailty. Some people will violently rewrite their entire personal history, just so they never have to look in the mirror and admit they were wrong. Valentina looks her husband dead in the eye, demanding the absolute truth. Enzo remains perfectly still, a dark calculus shifting behind his eyes. When he speaks, his tone is terrifyingly serene. He admits the patriarch offered him either sister, bargaining their lives like luxury vehicles. He chose Valentina intentionally. With surgical precision, he breaks Chiara down, telling her she was too loud, too desperate, and entirely too easy to manipulate. He steps close to his wife, declaring that her quiet, unbreakable strength was the exact foundation his empire required. Hearing this, Chiara shatters into a million pieces. It leaves us with a timeless truth. True, undeniable power never actually has to shout to prove it belongs at the head of the table. The tension in the room reaches a boiling point. Chiara thrashes against her chains, the horrific reality of her fate, finally bleeding into her eyes. She stares at Enzo, seeing the cold-blooded monster before her, and asks if he is going to end her life. Enzo gives a slow, relaxed nod, showing the effortless calm of an apex predator. But, in a brilliant cinematic pivot, Valentina steps into the line of fire. She looks at this toxic sister, who threatened her child, and slams on the brakes. She commands the crime boss to stand down. She calmly explains that burying her sister will not erase the trauma woven into their shared past. The lesson here is profound. Destroying the exact person who broke you never rebuilds the fragile pieces of yourself they took away. Why does Valentina stay the executioner's hand when the trigger is right there? She refuses to let her child grow up in the shadow of a father who slaughters his own blood. Enzo warns that Chiara will hunt them forever, but Valentina delivers a sentence far more devastating than a bullet. She condemns her sister to permanent solitary confinement, locking her in a silent concrete box to lose her mind. Chiara spits at her feet, mocking her as a coward. Valentina's gaze is colder than a winter grave. She whispers that calculated mercy is what absolute power actually looks like, testing Enzo to see if the wild wolf will finally heal. We often forget this in our own conflicts. Sometimes, true discipline is having the terrifying strength to let the heavy sword remain quietly in its sheath. The camera lingers on the unthinkable as the untouchable kingpin actually bends. Enzo relinquishes his iron grip, quietly banishing Chiara to a frozen maximum security cell in Sweden for the rest of her days. As her desperate screams fade down the marble corridor, the physical weight crushing Valentina visibly lifts. 6 months bleed past, and the lens opens on a transformed estate. The suffocating tension and armed guards are gone. Instead, the bright laughter of a baby fills the sunlit halls, breathing warmth into the cold stone. Enzo and Valentina have renewed their vows in the shadows, yet the cinematic framing leaves us with an undeniable truth. You can build a beautiful new home over a graveyard, but the earth will always remember what lies buried beneath the floorboards. Let us pause the frame right here, you and I, and really look at this room. Notice the heavy quiet. There is no mafia spectacle designed to feed a fragile ego. They stripped the illusion down to the bone. It is just two fractured souls trying to reset a poisoned dynamic. Enzo speaks his vows in a low rasp, sliding a new ring onto her finger as a promise to end the lies. Valentina holds his gaze, demanding he never lock her out again. But the camera does not lie. A betrayal of that magnitude leaves a permanent scar. She still flinches at shadows, haunted by the phantom pain of the life he broke. Yet, they do not run away. The hardest lesson we ever learn and love is raw endurance. They choose to sit in the messy ruins, painstakingly rebuilding one exhausting day at a time. Watch the lighting in this next shot. Valentina slips into the dimly lit nursery, burying her face against her infant just to remember how to draw a breath. The child coos, and you watch the rigid terror melt from her spine. Enzo appears in the doorway, swallowed by shadows. The visual contrast is pure tragedy. We see the immaculate cut of his suit, pressing against the violent ink creeping up his throat. His voice is a heavy rasp as he confesses. The crying did not wake him, because his eyes never closed. He crosses the room, wrapping his arms around his family like a human shield. Sometimes, love is just pure terror. In the dead of night, his mind endlessly calculates the razor-thin margin by which he almost lost his entire world, and the realization completely paralyzes him. Look closely at his eyes during this scene. The kingpin looks at the woman he broke and softly admits that he owes her life. His brow furrows in disbelief that she stayed, knowing anyone with sense would have vanished into the night. Valentina stands as cold and still as carved marble. She strips away his romantic illusion, making it clear she did not stay to save his soul. She stayed for their child, to prove that a shattered father could be glued back together. She stares down the predator who tore her mind to pieces, granting him grace, because he is doing the brutal work of changing. We do not need our loved ones to be flawless, we just need them to keep trying. Right before the heavy weight of the moment crushes them both, the baby babbles, shattering the dark tension. Enzo forces a crooked smile, joking that their child inherited her fire from her mother. Valentina lets out a sudden laugh, the sound thick with exhausted relief. The camera tracks them onto a balcony, surrounded by heavy iron gates. It looks like an impenetrable fortress. But fate has a cruel sense of irony. Bullets cannot pierce those stone walls, yet a fragile piece of paper slipped through the armor. Valentina reveals that Chiara smuggled a desperate letter out of the psychiatric ward. It is the classic plea of a broken narcissist, begging for absolution. When Enzo tenses, Valentina offers a chilling smile. Here is the ultimate lesson. True power is refusing to engage with toxic ghosts from your past. She gave her the cruelest punishment possible, absolute, unbroken silence. We can almost feel the physical weight of that folded paper resting in her trembling hand. Forgiving her abuser feels entirely impossible, but clutching onto that burning hatred is like drinking poison and patiently waiting for the enemy to choke. It slowly rots the soul. This is the exact moment Enzo actually proves his change. He does not charge in to violently fix the problem. Instead, he simply stands at her shoulder, a quiet mountain of support, vowing to back whatever choice she ultimately makes. Valentina exhales, realizing the lonely, exhausting war against her personal demons is finally over. The sky above them bleeds into a bruised, tragic violet. We jump forward a few years, and the fragile peace fractures. Their daughter, Sophia, is old enough to ask dangerous questions, forcing Valentina to translate their waking nightmare. Watch the incredibly careful restraint in her body language during this shot. She sits at the edge of the bed, softly tucking the blankets around her child, trying to turn a history of mafia blood and psychological torture into a gentle bedtime story. She whispers about a dark season when Mommy and Daddy simply lost their way. The innocent girl, kept completely ignorant of the violence that actively shields her, smiles and says they fixed it. Valentina strokes her daughter's hair, her eyes heavy with a profound life lesson. She explains that healing is never a simple magic trick. It is a grueling, exhausting choice you must wake up and make every single morning. She tells her little girl that life brings impossible pain, but she carries the thick blood of survivors who never, ever back away from the burning flames. Valentina lingers by the door, staring at a purely innocent child who cannot fathom the ocean of blood it took to create her. She steps into the dim hallway, finding Enzo positioned like a loyal, silent sentry in the shadows. She immediately reaches for his large hand, her fingers tracing the jagged, violent scars on his knuckles to ground her racing heart. When she whispers that Sophia is asking the hard questions, the camera captures Enzo physically stiffening. He slips right back into a cold, tactical mindset, demanding to know how much truth escaped. But then, the terrifying mob boss completely shatters. His broad shoulders slump, and a broken man quietly asks the single question tearing at his soul. He desperately needs to know if she regrets staying to build a life on his ruined foundation. She holds the steady gaze of the man who once destroyed her, speaking with a fierce certainty. She tells him she does not regret a single piece of the life they dragged from the ashes. A dark, weary smile touches Enzo's lips as he vows that the monster he once was is buried deep in the ground. I want you to look closely at the director's brilliant choice here. They walk down a long corridor lined with perfectly staged family portraits, sunlit vacations, and gentle smiles. It is a beautifully curated ghost story of a normal life. Suddenly, Valentina stops. Enzo pulls her flush against his chest, dropping the absolute last shred of his lethal persona. A man can only run from his violent sins for so long. His rough voice fractures, choking on heavy tears as he thanks her for a grace he never earned, swearing his life is forever hers. She presses her palm flat against his chest, anchoring herself to the heavy, steady thud of his heart. She whispers that his relentless effort to change is the only reason she did not walk away. You and I need to pause the film one last time, right here. Just look at the magnificent framing. They sit at the center of an empire, and every marble tile was cemented with the blood of their shared trauma. She rises onto her toes, gently kissing the lips of the architect who orchestrated her worst nightmare. It is a tragic, beautiful portrait of human survival. If there is one stark lesson to pull from this wreckage, it is this: you cannot magically wash away the violence done to your soul. True resilience is finding the agonizing strength to build a beautiful house over a dark graveyard of broken glass. In the dark theater of the human mind, we rarely dare to use a heavy word like love. Consider the dynamic between Vittorio and Luca. The casual audience sees an unbreakable bond of devotion, but the camera reveals the cold shell of a psychological hostage situation. Vittorio's brutal betrayal was never a simple business move. It was a sadistic god running a cruel stress test, pushing his subject to the breaking point, just to watch him blindly crawl back. The profound tragedy is that Luca fundamentally mistakes his deep trauma for righteous loyalty. He will wake up tomorrow and kneel before the exact man who ruined him, mistaking his heavy iron chains for destiny. The life lesson here leaves a bitter taste. The most inescapable prisons are never made of iron. They are forged by our desperate urge to seek safety in the hands that actively drowned us.
Chiara's betrayal offers a powerful lesson about jealousy, comparison, and emotional corruption. Her actions are cruel, but the story also reveals that her cruelty comes from years of feeling second,
overlooked, and less loved. She believes Valentina received everything: the marriage, the house, the respect, the pregnancy, and the love of powerful people. Instead of facing her own pain honestly, Chiara turns comparison into resentment and resentment into revenge. This teaches an important educational lesson.
Jealousy stops being a feeling and becomes an identity.
Everyone experiences comparison at some point, especially between siblings, friends, or colleagues. But Chiara allows comparison to define her life. She begins to see Valentina's happiness as an insult, not as something separate from her own worth.
Completely.
She does not only want Enzo, she wants to prove that she can take something from Valentina. Her affair becomes less about love and more about power. Later, when Enzo chooses Valentina and the unborn child, Chiara's jealousy becomes even more destructive. She begins feeding information to enemies, risking the safety of her sister, Enzo, and even the baby. This shows how unchecked envy can move from emotional pain into moral collapse. The educational value is clear. If we define ourselves by what others have, we may lose the ability to value what is still good within us.
Chiara's tragedy is that she once mattered to Valentina. She was loved as a sister, but her envy made her blind to that love.
Valentina's final mercy shows strength, but also wisdom. She refuses to let Chiara remain close enough to continue causing harm. The lesson is that compassion does not require allowing toxic people continued access to your life.